The warning lights flashed red across the bridge of the council. Ship Harmony's voice. Commander Thexara stared at the massive screen showing the destruction of New Alteria colony. Bright explosions lit up the darkness of space as enemy ships tore through the peaceful settlement. Her forearms shook as she watched thousands of innocent lives disappear in seconds. "How many survivors?" she asked her communications officer. "None from the outer colonies," Lieutenant Vexy replied, his voice barely a whisper. "The Zephrians are not taking prisoners this time. They are killing everyone." Thexara closed her large eyes and tried to control her breathing. In her 50 years of service to the Galactic Council, she had never seen such complete destruction. The Zephrians had always been aggressive, but this was something different. This was total war. The Zephrian Empire had been quiet for almost 10 years. The Council thought they had given up their dreams of conquest after the last peace treaty. Everyone believed the war-loving aliens had finally learned to live peacefully with their neighbors. How wrong they had been. 3 weeks ago, Zephrian battle fleets had appeared without warning at the edge of Alterian space. They attacked with new ships, bigger and more powerful than anything the Council had ever seen. These massive vessels, each one the size of a small moon, carried weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single shot. The Council defense fleet had rushed to help the Alterians. They sent their best ships and most experienced commanders. It had not been enough. The Zephrian dreadnoughts cut through their forces like a hot knife through butter. Energy shields that had protected Council ships for centuries meant nothing against these new weapons. "Commander," called out Tactical Officer Zernap from his station, "the Zephrian fleet is moving toward the Alterian home system. They will reach the planet in 6 days. 6 days. Thexara felt her stomach drop. The Alterian homeworld had 12 billion people. Most of them were civilians who had never hurt anyone. They lived peaceful lives, growing food and making art. They had no weapons, no armies, no way to protect themselves. "What about our reinforcements?" Thexara asked. "Admiral Korth's fleet was destroyed yesterday," Zernap reported. The hegemony. Forces retreated after losing half their ships. The Crystalline Alliance says they need more time to prepare their defenses. Thexara understood what this meant. The Council's greatest military leaders were gone. Their most powerful allies were running away or hiding. The galaxy's peacekeeping forces were broken and scattered. She walked to the center of the bridge and looked at her crew. They were all different species, but she could see the same fear in their eyes. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and the distant sound of emergency alarms. "Send out the distress call," she ordered. "All frequencies. All known civilizations." Lieutenant Vexy looked up from his console. "Commander, we have already contacted every major power in the galaxy. No one is coming to help." "Then we contact everyone," Thexara said firmly. "Every species, every colony, every ship that can receive our signal. Someone out there might be able to help." She knew it was probably hopeless. The major powers had the strongest ships and the best weapons. If they could not stop the Zephrians, what chance did smaller civilizations have? But she had sworn an oath to protect innocent life, and she would not give up while there was still hope. "Include the new species," she added. "The humans from that death world they call Earth." Several crew members turned to look at her. The humans had only joined the Galactic Council 9 years ago. Their home planet was so dangerous that most aliens could not survive there for more than a few minutes. The gravity was too strong, the atmosphere was poisonous to many species, and the weather could kill unprepared visitors. "Commander," Zernap said carefully, "the humans only have 12 ships capable of space travel. Their technology is very primitive. Their weapons are still based on explosive chemicals and metal projectiles." Thexara nodded. She knew the humans were considered one of the weakest members of the Council. Their ships were crude and ugly, built from heavy metals instead of the elegant energy constructs used by advanced civilizations. Their computers were slow, their weapons were simple, and their fastest ships could barely reach half the speed of modern Council vessels. But something about the humans had always interested her. During the Council meetings, Representatives from other species would talk for hours about proper procedures and diplomatic solutions. The human ambassador, a stern woman named Sarah Chun, would sit quietly and listen. When she finally spoke, her words were always simple and direct. The Xara remembered the last council meeting before this crisis began. The hegemony representative had spent an hour explaining why military action should always be a last resort. The Crystalline Alliance delegate had given a beautiful speech about the importance of peaceful negotiation. Ambassador Chun had stood up and said just 4 words: "Bullies understand only strength." At the time, many council members had been shocked by such a simple, aggressive statement. They whispered that humans were too violent, too primitive to understand civilized diplomacy. But now, watching Zephrian ships destroy helpless colonies, the Xara wondered if the human ambassador had been right. "Send the message to everyone," she repeated. "Include full tactical data about Zephrian capabilities. Tell them what we are facing." Lieutenant Vexi worked at his console for several minutes. The distress call would go out on every frequency used by spacefaring civilizations. It would include detailed information about Zephrian ship designs, weapons, and tactics. Any species that received the message would know exactly how dangerous the enemy was. "Message sent, Commander," Vexi reported. "Estimated delivery time to human space is 14 hours. 14 hours. By then, the Zephrian fleet would be even closer to the Altarian homeworld." Vexara tried not to think about what would happen to those 12 billion innocent people if no help arrived. The bridge fell silent again. Everyone knew they were probably sending a message that no one could answer. The galaxy's greatest military powers had already failed. What could a few small civilizations do against an enemy that had crushed everything in its path? But Thexara had been a soldier for too long to give up hope completely. Sometimes help came from unexpected places. Sometimes the smallest forces could make the biggest difference. She had learned that lesson many times during her long career. On the main screen, the Zephrian fleet continued its advance. The massive dreadnoughts moved through space like black mountains, their hulls reflecting no light. Behind them followed hundreds of smaller warships, all armed with the terrible plasma weapons that had destroyed so many council vessels. War Master Kethver commanded the Zephrian forces from his flagship, the Blood of Conquest. Intelligence reports said he was one of the most successful military commanders in Zephrian history. He had conquered 17 star systems and enslaved dozens of alien species. His ships had never lost a major battle. The Xara had studied the reports about Kethver and his tactics. The Zephrian commander was brilliant, ruthless, and completely without mercy. He did not accept surrender. He did not spare civilians. When Kethver conquered a world, he either enslaved the population or killed them all. The Zephrians believed that only the strong deserved to survive. They saw other species as weak and inferior. Their culture celebrated war and conquest above everything else. Peace to them was just a chance to prepare for the next battle, but they had made one mistake. They had declared war on the entire galaxy. Every peaceful species, every defenseless colony, every innocent family was now their enemy. The Zephrians were strong, but they were fighting alone against everyone else. The Xara hoped that would be enough. She hoped that somewhere in the galaxy, someone would receive their distress call and decide to fight back. Even if their ships were small, even if their weapons were primitive, even if they had no chance of winning. Sometimes courage mattered. More than technology, the hours passed slowly. Reports came in from across the battle zone. More council ships were destroyed. More colonies fell to Zephrian attacks. The enemy advanced on schedule toward their main target. Then, exactly 14 hours after the distress call was sent, Lieutenant Vexi looked up from his communications console with surprise. "Commander," he said, "we are receiving a response." The Xara felt her heart skip a beat. "From whom?" "The humans, Commander. Ambassador Chun is requesting immediate tactical briefing and full strategic analysis. She says the human fleet is preparing to mobilize." Several bridge officers laughed. The Xara silenced them with a look. 12 primitive ships against 1,000? Zephrian dreadnoughts might seem like a joke, but at least someone was willing to try. Send them everything we have, she ordered. Ship designs, weapon specifications, tactical analysis, strategic assessment. Give them complete access to our military database? Commander, Zernap said quietly, perhaps we should also warn them about the odds they will be facing. Vexara thought about this for a moment. Then she smiled for the first time in days. No, she said. Something tells me the humans already know exactly what they are getting into. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of the UES Indomitable, Earth's flagship and the most advanced vessel in humanity's small space fleet. The massive holographic display showed tactical data streaming in from the Galactic Council. Every few seconds, new reports arrived showing more destruction, more colonies lost, more innocent lives ended by Zephrian weapons. Chun was 54 years old and had spent her entire adult life preparing for moments like this. She had fought in the water wars of 2387, commanded troops during the Mars Rebellion, and led the first human expedition beyond the solar system. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her dark eyes studied the incoming data with the focus of a predator. Captain Martinez, she called to her second-in-command. Status report on fleet readiness. Captain Elena Martinez looked up from her console. She was younger than Chun, with short, black hair and scars on her hands from her years as a Marine. Engineer. All 12 ships report ready for immediate departure, Admiral. Fusion reactors are at full power, weapon systems are charged, and crews are standing by. Chun nodded. 12 ships. It sounded pathetic compared to the 1,000-vessel armada that the Zephrians had deployed. But these 12 ships represented everything humanity had built in space. Every resource, every technological advance, every lesson learned from centuries of warfare on Earth. The UES Indomitable was the pride of the human fleet. She was 800 meters long and massed almost 2 million tons. Her hull was built from titanium steel alloy, layered with ceramic armor plates that could withstand direct hits from nuclear weapons. Inside her belly were magnetic accelerator, cannons that could fire tungsten slugs at 30% of light speed. The other 11 ships were smaller but equally deadly. The destroyers, relentless, defiant, and unstoppable, carried swarms of kinetic interceptors and close-range plasma cutters. The cruisers Washington, Moscow, and Beijing mounted heavy railguns and tactical nuclear missiles. The assault carriers, Normandy, Guadalcanal, and Stalingrad could deploy hundreds of marine boarding pods in minutes. To galactic standards, human ships were primitive and ugly. They used brute force fusion reactors instead of elegant antimatter drives. Their weapons fired simple metal projectiles instead of sophisticated energy beams. Their hulls were thick slabs of metal instead of lightweight force fields, but Chun knew something that the rest of the galaxy did not understand. Human ships were not built for elegance or efficiency. They were built for war. Every system had backups. Every weapon had multiple firing modes. Every hull plate was designed to keep fighting even after taking massive damage. Admiral, called out Communications Officer Jiang from his station. We are receiving real-time updates from Council forces in the combat zone. The Zephrian advance has accelerated. They will reach the Altarian homeworld in 4 days instead of 6. Chun felt her jaw tighten. 4 days meant they had even less time than expected. The human fleet would need to travel for 3 days at maximum speed just to reach the battle zone. That left only 1 day to somehow stop an enemy force that had already destroyed everything the galaxy could throw at it. Any word from other civilizations? She asked. Anyone else responding to the distress call? Jiang shook his head. The hegemony is reinforcing their home systems. The Crystalline Alliance is requesting time to build new defensive platforms. The Voidwalkers say this conflict does not concern them. Chun was not surprised. She had attended enough council meetings to understand how galactic politics worked. Every species was primarily concerned with protecting themselves. They would offer sympathy and moral support, but when real fighting was needed, they found excuses to stay home. Humans were different. Perhaps it was because Earth was such a dangerous world that its people had learned to fight or die. Perhaps it was because human history was filled with stories of small groups standing against overwhelming odds. Or perhaps it was simply because humans were too stubborn to know when they were beaten. "Connect me to the fleet," Chun ordered. "All captains, priority channel." The holographic display changed to show 11 smaller screens, each containing the face of a ship captain. These were some of the finest military officers Earth had ever produced. They came from every continent and every branch of the old national militaries. What united them was their absolute dedication to protecting innocent life. Captain Sarah Kim of the destroyer Relentless had been born in the underground cities of Korea during the climate wars. Captain Almeida Hassan of the cruiser Cairo had fought pirates in the asteroid belt for 15 years. Captain Maria Santos of the assault carrier Normandy had led the first successful boarding action against a hostile alien vessel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chun began, her voice carrying clearly across the communication channels, "you have all seen the tactical data from the Galactic Council. The situation is simple. An aggressive empire is slaughtering innocent civilians, and no one else is willing to stop them." She paused and looked at each captain in turn. "We are outnumbered almost 100 to 1. The enemy has superior technology, better weapons, and more experience with space combat. By every rational analysis, we have no chance of victory." "Captain," Santos smiled grimly. "When has that ever stopped us before, Admiral?" The other captains chuckled. Chen felt a familiar warmth in her chest. This was why she loved serving with humans. Other species saw impossible odds and calculated the probability of failure. Humans saw impossible odds and started planning how to win anyway. "The Zephrians think they understand warfare," Chun continued. "They have bigger ships, more powerful weapons, and shields that can stop any energy attack the Council can produce. They believe that technological superiority guarantees victory." She brought up a detailed schematic of a Zephrian dreadnought on the main display. The massive vessel was an impressive sight, bristling with plasma cannons and protected by multiple layers of energy shielding. "But there is something they do not know about humans," Chun said. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We learned to survive by being smarter, tougher, and more adaptable than anything else on our planet. We learned that the best technology means nothing if you do not know how to use it properly." Captain Zhang of the cruiser Beijing leaned forward. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "We are going to show the galaxy what humans do best. We are going to take everything the enemy thinks they know about warfare and prove them wrong." She activated a series of tactical overlays on the display. The Zephrians fight like most advanced civilizations. They rely on long-range energy weapons and defensive shields. They keep their distance and trade fire until one side breaks. It is clean, efficient, and predictable. The tactical display showed typical galactic battle formations. Ships arranged in neat lines, firing at each other across vast distances, protected by energy barriers that absorbed incoming attacks. "We are not going to fight that battle," Chun announced. "We are going to do what humans have always done when faced with superior enemies. We are going to change the rules." Over the next hour, Chun outlined her strategy. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of trying to match Zephrian technology, the human fleet would use the enemy's strengths against them. Instead of fighting at long range, they would close to point-blank distance. Instead of relying on energy weapons, they would use simple, kinetic projectiles that could punch through any shield. The plan was dangerous. It required the human crews to endure accelerations that would kill most alien species. It demanded split-second timing and perfect coordination. One mistake would result in the destruction of the entire fleet. But it was also brilliant. The Zephrians had never faced an enemy willing to ram their ships at near-light speed. They had never encountered weapons that ignored energy shields completely. They had never fought opponents who treated ship-to-ship combat like a knife fight instead of a formal duel. Admiral, Captain Hassan asked, what about boarding actions? The Zephrian ships are massive. Even if we disable them, they will still have thousands of crew members. Chun's smile became even more predatory. That is where we use our greatest advantage. Humans are not just mentally adapted for warfare. We are physically adapted for it too. She brought up comparative biological data on the display. Humans were stronger than most galactic species. They could survive in environments that would kill other aliens. They could function with injuries that would incapacitate creatures from peaceful worlds. Zephrians are warriors, but they have been using technology to fight their battles for centuries, Chun explained. When was the last time any of them had to fight hand-to-hand combat? When was the last time they had to survive without their fancy equipment? The answer was obvious. Advanced civilizations had moved beyond personal combat long ago. They fought wars with ships and weapons and computers. The idea of soldiers physically fighting each other was considered primitive and barbaric. But humans had never stopped training for personal combat. Every Marine on every human ship knew how to fight with weapons, with tools, or with their bare hands. They could operate in zero-gravity, toxic atmospheres, or extreme temperatures. They could keep fighting even when wounded, exhausted, or outnumbered. Load all assault carriers with full Marine complements, Chun ordered. Equip boarding teams with standard combat gear and emergency life support. We are going to take the fight directly to the enemy. The captains began implementing their orders immediately. Across the human fleet, crews prepared for the most dangerous mission in their species' history. Engineers checked and double-checked every system. Weapons officers loaded magazines with tungsten penetrator rounds. Marines suited up in their powered armor and checked their weapons. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Patricia Reynolds prepared for the casualties that were sure to come. As the fleet's chief medical officer, she had treated every type of injury imaginable, but she had never tried to perform surgery while her ship was accelerating at 8 gravities and taking enemy fire. "Doctor," her assistant asked, "do you really think we can win this?" Dr. Reynolds looked up from her surgical preparations. She was 60 years old and had served in conflicts across human space. She had seen the worst that war could do to the human body, and she had seen the incredible determination that kept humans fighting when anyone else would give up. "I think we are going to make the enemy pay a price they never expected," she said quietly. "And sometimes that is all you need to win." 3 hours after receiving the distress call, the human fleet was ready to depart. Every ship reported full readiness. Every crew member was at their station. Every weapon was loaded and ready to fire. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, innocent people were dying while an evil empire grew stronger. The galaxy's protectors had failed. The great civilizations had retreated. Only 12 human ships stood between the Zephrians and total victory. "All ships," she broadcast, "prepare for jump to lightspeed. Destination, Altarian system. Mission, stop the Zephrian advance by any means necessary." She paused for a moment, thinking about the words that would send her people into almost certain death. "This is Admiral Chun to all human vessels. We are going to show the galaxy what Earthers are made of. We may be outnumbered, outgunned, and operating far from home, but we carry something more powerful than any weapon the enemy possesses. We carry the determination of a species that has never learned how to quit." The fleet jumped to lightspeed in perfect formation. Behind them, Earth continued its ancient rotation, unaware that its children were racing toward the greatest battle in human history. Ahead of them waited an enemy that had conquered star systems and enslaved entire species. An enemy that had never been defeated, an enemy that believed itself invincible. The Zephrians were about to learn that they had made a terrible mistake. They had declared war on humanity, and humans had been preparing for this fight for their entire evolutionary history. War Master Kethver stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Blood of Conquest, and watched the destruction of another Council defense platform. The massive structure, once home to 50,000 military personnel, exploded in a brilliant flash of white light. Pieces of metal and energy conduits scattered across space like dying stars. Kethver was nearly 3 meters tall and covered in dark gray scales that had been scarred by decades of warfare. His forearms ended in clawed hands that could crush steel, and his red eyes glowed with the satisfaction of another victory. He had been fighting wars for over 60 years, and this campaign was proving to be one of his most successful. "Status report," he commanded in his deep, rumbling voice. Sub-Commander Vorthak. His chief tactical officer stepped forward. Like all Zephrians, Vorthak was built for combat. His thick armor was covered with weapons and sensors, and his scarred face showed the results of many battles. "All objectives secured, War Master," Vorthak reported. "The Altarian outer colonies have been completely destroyed. Our advance forces have eliminated the remaining Council ships in Sectors 7 through 12. The path to the Altarian homeworld is clear." Kethver nodded with satisfaction. The Galactic Council had been much weaker than expected. Their ships were fast and their shields were strong, but they lacked the killing instinct necessary for real warfare. When faced with true aggression, they had broken and run like frightened children. "What about our losses?" he asked. "Minimal, War Master. We have lost 18 fighter craft and 2 escort vessels. 3 dreadnoughts have minor damage to their outer hulls. All ships remain fully operational, 18 fighters and 2 escorts, against an enemy force that had numbered in the thousands just days ago." Kethver felt the familiar warmth of victory spreading through his body. This war was going even better than he had hoped. The Zephrian fleet was a sight that would terrify any rational being. At its center were the 12 massive dreadnoughts, each one over 5 kilometers long and bristling with plasma cannons. These ships could destroy entire cities with a single volley, and their energy shields could absorb any weapon the Council possessed. Surrounding the dreadnoughts were hundreds of smaller vessels, cruisers armed with long-range particle beams, destroyers carrying swarms of guided missiles, fighter carriers that could deploy thousands of attack craft in minutes. Altogether, the fleet represented the military might of an empire that had conquered dozens of star systems. But the true strength of the Zephrian fleet was not its technology. It was the warrior culture that had created it. Every ship was commanded by veterans who had proven themselves in battle. Every weapon was maintained by engineers who understood that failure meant death. Every tactical decision was made by minds that had been trained from birth to think only of victory. Kethver walked to the main tactical display, his heavy footsteps echoing across the bridge. The holographic map showed the current positions of all Zephrian forces. Red icons marked enemy positions, though there were few of those left. Green markers showed the locations of conquered worlds, and there were many of those indeed. "Show me the Altarian homeworld," he ordered. The display zoomed in on a blue-green planet surrounded by orbital defense platforms. Intelligence reports indicated that 12 billion Altarians lived on that world. Most of them were civilians who had never seen warfare. They spent their lives growing food, creating art, and raising families in peaceful cities. Soon they would learn what it meant to face the Zephrian Empire. "The planetary defenses look impressive," Vorthak commented, studying the tactical data. 47 orbital platforms, each armed with heavy plasma cannons. A network of defensive satellites covering all approach vectors. Ground-based missile sites at every major population center. Kethver laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Impressive to whom? We have faced defenses 10 times stronger than these. Remember the siege of Krexstar Prime? They had over 200 platforms and thought themselves invincible." Vorthak nodded. The siege of Krexstar Prime had been one of Kethver's greatest victories. The enemy had possessed superior numbers and defensive positions, but they had lacked the will to fight to the death. When Zephrian forces had broken through their outer defenses, the defenders had surrendered rather than face complete destruction. "The Altarians will fall just as easily," Kethver continued. "They are a peaceful species. They have no experience with real warfare. When they see our dreadnoughts approaching their world, they will beg for mercy." The War Master turned to his Communications Officer. Have there been any responses to the Council's distress call? A few minor powers have offered to send supply ships and medical aid, the officer reported. Nothing that could affect the outcome of our campaign. Most civilizations are preparing to defend their own territories rather than helping others. This was exactly what Kethver had expected. The galaxy was full of species that talked about unity and cooperation, but when faced with real danger, they thought only of themselves. It was a weakness that made conquest much easier. Wait, the communications officer added, checking his displays more carefully. There is one response that might be of interest. A small fleet from the human homeworld has departed for this system. Several bridge officers laughed at this news. The humans were famous throughout the galaxy as the newcomers from the Death world called Earth. Their planet was so dangerous that most civilized species could not survive there for more than a few minutes. The gravity was crushing, the atmosphere was toxic, and the weather systems could kill unprepared visitors. But despite coming from such a hostile environment, the humans themselves seemed remarkably weak. They had only been members of the Galactic Council for 9 years. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their ships were crude constructions of metal and ceramics rather than the elegant energy matrices used by advanced civilizations. How many ships? Kethver asked, more curious than concerned. 12 vessels, War Master. All of them appear to be their most advanced designs. 12 ships, against a Zephrian armada of over 1,000 vessels. Kethver had heard that humans were known for their stubborn nature, but this seemed less like courage and more like stupidity. What do we know about human military capabilities? He asked Vorthak. The tactical officer accessed the intelligence files. Very limited space combat experience, War Master. Their ships use primitive fusion reactors and simple kinetic weapons. No energy shields, no plasma cannons, no antimatter drives. Their largest vessel is less than 1 kilometer long and masses only 2 million tons. Kethver compared these numbers to his own flagship. The Blood of Conquest was over 5 kilometers long and massed 30 million tons. Its main plasma cannon could vaporize the largest human ship with a single shot. Its shields could absorb the combined firepower of the entire human fleet without taking damage. Fascinating, he mused. I have heard that humans are supposed to be unusually aggressive for such a primitive species. Perhaps we will finally get to test that reputation. The truth was that Kethver was slightly disappointed by how easy this campaign had been so far. The Council forces had been numerous but weak. They relied too much on defensive tactics and not enough on offensive action. Their commanders were too concerned with minimizing casualties and not concerned enough with achieving victory. A real fight against a truly dangerous enemy would be much more satisfying. But 12 primitive ships hardly qualified as a real challenge. Should we divert forces to intercept the human fleet? Vorthak asked. Kethver considered this for a moment. It would be easy enough to send a squadron of cruisers to destroy the approaching human ships. A quick strike would eliminate them before they could even reach the battle zone, but that would rob him of the chance to study these famous Deathworlders in action. Intelligence reports suggested that humans had an unusual approach to warfare, though no one could explain exactly what made them different. This might be his only opportunity to observe them directly. No, he decided, let them come. We will deal with them after we finish destroying the remaining Council forces. I am curious to see what these Deathworlders can do against a real military. The next few hours passed quickly as Zephrian forces continued their advance. Scout ships reported that the last Council defense fleet had been located and was retreating toward the Altarian homeworld. The enemy vessels were badly damaged and low on ammunition. They would not be able to mount any serious resistance. Kethver studied the tactical projections with satisfaction. In less than 4 days, his fleet would reach the Altarian homeworld. The orbital defenses would fall within hours. The planet itself would surrender before the end of the week. After that, the Zephrian Empire would control the entire sector. Other civilizations would see what happened to those who opposed them, and many would choose to surrender rather than fight. The galaxy would learn to fear the Zephrian name once again. "War Master," the communications officer called out. "We are receiving new intelligence about the approaching human fleet." "What sort of intelligence?" Kethver asked. "The humans have been analyzing our tactical data. They have requested detailed information about our ship designs and weapons capabilities from the Council database." This was interesting. Most species tried to gather intelligence secretly, through spies and hidden sensors. The humans were asking for the information openly, as if they had no intention of hiding their preparations. "Have the Council forces provided this information?" Kethver asked. "Yes, War Master. Complete technical specifications, tactical analysis, strategic assessments. Everything they know about our capabilities." Kethver was amused by this development. Either the humans were completely inexperienced with military intelligence, or they were so confident in their abilities that they did not care if the enemy knew they were studying them. "Let them study all they want," he said with another metallic laugh. "Knowledge of our capabilities will not help them when they face our firepower. If anything, it will make them more likely to surrender when they realize how outmatched they are." But even as he spoke these words, Kethver felt a small stirring of curiosity in his mind. The humans were behaving unlike any enemy he had ever faced. Most species either ran away when confronted with superior force, or they tried to match his technology with their own advanced weapons. The humans seemed to be doing neither. They were not retreating, but they were also not trying to build bigger ships or more powerful weapons. Instead, they were studying their enemy carefully and preparing for something that Kethver could not quite understand. For the first time in this campaign, the War Master felt a tiny flicker of uncertainty. Not fear, certainly. No primitive species could threaten the might of the Zephrian Empire. But perhaps these Deathworlders would prove more interesting than he had initially expected. "Continue monitoring human communications," he ordered. "I want to know everything they are planning." As the hours passed and the Zephrian fleet drew closer to its final objective, Kethver found himself thinking more and more about the approaching human ships. 12 vessels against 1,000. Primitive technology against advanced weapons. A species that had barely achieved interstellar travel against an empire that had conquered the stars. By every rational analysis, the humans had no chance of affecting the outcome of this war. They would arrive, perhaps fire a few ineffective shots, and then be destroyed or driven away like all the others. But something about their behavior suggested that they might not see the situation in quite the same way, and that, Kethver thought with growing anticipation, might make this campaign interesting after all. The human fleet dropped out of light speed at the edge of the Altarian system with a flash of twisted space and radiation. Admiral Sarah Chun felt the familiar sensation of her stomach dropping as the Indomitable's gravity generators struggled to compensate for the sudden change in velocity. Around her, the bridge crew worked quickly to assess their new situation. "Navigation report," Chun ordered. "Jump successful, Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Park announced from his station. "All 12 ships accounted for. We are holding position at the system's edge, approximately 6 billion kilometers from the primary star." Chun nodded and turned to the tactical display. What she saw there made her jaw clench with anger. The system was a graveyard. Broken pieces of Council ships drifted in the darkness, their hulls torn open and their crews dead. Emergency beacons flashed weakly from a few life pods, but most of the survivors were already beyond help. "My God," whispered Captain Martinez. "How many ships did they lose?" Tactical Officer Wang worked at his console for several moments before answering. "Scanning debris patterns and energy signatures, I count at least 300 destroyed Council vessels, possibly more, 300 ships. Each one had carried hundreds or thousands of crew members. Families, friends, people with hopes and dreams who had died trying to protect innocent civilians." Chen felt the familiar cold anger that had driven her through decades of military service. "What about the enemy?" she asked. Wang's display changed to show the current positions of Zephrian forces. The main fleet is advancing toward the Altarian homeworld. Estimated arrival in 36 hours. I count 1,047 enemy vessels, including 12 massive dreadnoughts. Chun studied the tactical data carefully. The Zephrian ships were arranged in perfect formation, advancing steadily through space like a wall of destruction. Their energy signatures were enormous, indicating power levels far beyond anything the human fleet could match, but Chin was not looking at their power levels. She was studying their formation, their movement patterns, and their apparent tactical doctrine. What she saw gave her the first glimmer of hope since receiving the distress call. "They fight like a parade," she said quietly. Captain Martinez looked confused. "Admiral? Look at their formation," Chun explained, pointing to the display. "Perfect. Spacing, rigid organization, predictable movement. They are fighting like this is a demonstration rather than a war." Chun had seen this before in her years of military service. Advanced civilizations often became so focused on showing their technological superiority that they forgot the basic principles of warfare. They relied on overwhelming force and advanced equipment instead of tactics, adaptability, and surprise. "Communications?" Chun called out. "Any signals from surviving council forces?" Communications Officer Zhang worked his controls for several minutes. "I am picking up weak transmissions from a few damaged ships near the inner system. They appear to be regrouping around the Altarian homeworld for a final defensive stand." Chun felt her heart sink. A final defensive stand meant that the council forces were preparing to die rather than retreat. They would make their last fight around the planet they were trying to protect, and they would all be destroyed in the process, unless the human fleet could change the tactical situation dramatically. "Navigation, plot a course for the Zephrian fleet," Chun ordered. "Maximum acceleration. All ships are to follow our lead." "Admiral," Captain Martinez said carefully, "our orders were to assist council forces. Should we not attempt to link up with the surviving ships first?" Chun shook her head. "The council forces are using standard galactic tactics. Long-range energy weapons, defensive formations, attrition warfare. They will lose because the Zephrians have better technology and more ships." She turned to face her second-in-command directly. "We are going to do something the Zephrians have never seen before. We are going to attack them directly." The bridge fell silent for a moment. Everyone understood what this meant. The human fleet would be charging straight at an enemy force that outnumbered them almost 100 to 1. Their small ships would be facing massive dreadnoughts, armed with weapons that could vaporize them instantly. But Chun had not survived 30 years of warfare by avoiding dangerous situations. She had learned that sometimes the most dangerous plan was also the most effective, precisely because no rational enemy would expect it. "All ships," she broadcast over the fleet communication channel. "This is Admiral Chun with new orders. We are going to demonstrate why humans are considered dangerous, despite our primitive technology." She paused to let her words sink in. "The enemy thinks they understand warfare because they have better weapons and bigger ships. They are about to learn that technology alone does not win battles. Courage, determination, and tactical flexibility win battles." The human fleet began to accelerate toward the Zephrian armada. Their fusion drives burned at maximum power, pushing the ships to velocities that would have been impossible for vessels with living crews from most other species. But humans had evolved on a high-gravity world, and their bodies could withstand accelerations that would kill aliens from lighter planets. As they approached, Chun continued to study the enemy formation. The Zephrian ships maintained perfect spacing and predictable movements. Their weapons were pointed forward, ready to engage targets at long range. Their shields were configured for maximum defensive coverage. It was exactly what she had hoped to see. "Tactical," she called out. "Begin target analysis. I want firing solutions for close-range kinetic strikes." Lieutenant Wang looked up from his console with surprise. "Admiral, kinetic weapons are ineffective against energy shields. The enemy barriers will absorb our projectiles before they can reach their hulls." Chun smiled grimly. "That would be true if we were fighting at normal engagement ranges. But we are not going to fight at normal ranges. She activated the tactical display and began outlining her plan. The human ships would accelerate directly toward the Zephrian fleet, using their superior maneuverability to avoid the worst of the enemy fire. At point-blank range, they would fire tungsten penetrator rounds at velocities approaching the speed of light. Energy shields are designed to absorb and deflect incoming attacks, Chan explained, but they have a maximum capacity. Hit them with enough kinetic energy in a small enough area, and they will collapse like a broken window. The plan was insane by galactic standards. No civilized species would deliberately close to knife-fighting range with an enemy that had superior firepower. The risk of destruction was enormous, and the chances of success seemed minimal. But Chun had studied human military history, and she knew that impossible victories often came from doing things that no rational enemy would expect. 20 minutes after beginning their attack run, the human fleet finally appeared on Zephrian sensors. On the bridge of the Blood of Conquest, War Master Kethver looked at the tactical display with amusement. "So the Deathworlders have finally arrived," he rumbled to his tactical officer. "Show me their approach vector." Sub-Commander Vorthak worked at his console for a moment. "War Master, they appear to be approaching directly. No attempt at flanking maneuvers or coordinated attacks with Council forces." Kethver was puzzled by this information. "They are attacking us head-on? With 12 primitive ships against our entire armada?" "Yes, War Master. Current acceleration indicates they will reach weapons range in 18 minutes. The Zephrian commander laughed loudly. "Remarkable. I had heard that humans were known for their aggression, but this exceeds even my expectations. They are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." He studied the tactical data more carefully. The human ships were small and crude-looking, with thick armor plating and simple geometric designs. They carried no visible energy weapons, no shield generators, no advanced defensive systems. By every measure of galactic technology, they were hopelessly outmatched. "What are their weapons capabilities?" Kethver asked. "Primitive kinetic accelerators, War Master. Metal projectiles fired by magnetic launchers. Effective range is extremely limited, and their penetration power is negligible against modern shielding." Kethver nodded with satisfaction. The humans were apparently planning to fight using weapons that had been obsolete for centuries. It would be like trying to attack a starship with rocks and clubs. "Should we deploy fighter squadrons to intercept them?" Vorthak asked. "No," Kethver decided. "I want to see what these Deathworlders can do. Order the fleet to maintain formation and prepare for long-range engagement. We will destroy them with our main guns when they come within range." But as the minutes passed and the human ships continued their suicidal charge, Kethver began to notice something unusual about their approach. The small vessels were not flying in the neat formations used by galactic militaries. Instead, they were weaving and dodging, constantly changing their vectors in seemingly random patterns. "What are they doing?" he asked Vorthak. "Unknown, War Master. Their flight patterns appear chaotic." "No discernible tactical formation?" Kethver frowned. The human ships were moving like individual fighters rather than capital vessels. They rolled and twisted through space, never maintaining a steady course for more than a few seconds. It was unlike anything he had ever seen in space combat. "Target the largest vessel," he ordered. "All dreadnoughts, prepare to fire on my command." The Blood of Conquest's main plasma cannon began to charge, its energy readings climbing toward maximum power. Around the fleet, 11 other dreadnoughts prepared their own weapons. Together they carried enough firepower to sterilize an entire planet. "Weapons ready, War Master." "Fire!" 12 beams of superheated plasma lanced across space toward the approaching human fleet. Each beam carried enough energy to vaporize a mountain, and they were all aimed at the human flagship Indomitable. But something impossible happened. The plasma beams passed harmlessly through the space where the human ship had been moments before. The vessel had somehow dodged aside at the last possible second, avoiding destruction by mere meters. "How did they do that?" Vorthak demanded, staring at his displays in confusion. Kethver was equally puzzled. No ship that size should have been able to change course so quickly. The inertia alone should have torn the vessel apart, not to mention what the acceleration would do to its crew. "Target them again," he ordered. "All weapons, continuous fire." The Zephrian fleet opened up with everything they had. Hundreds of plasma cannons fired simultaneously, filling space with deadly energy beams. Missile launchers added their own contributions, sending swarms of guided warheads toward the human ships. But the humans continued their impossible dance through the storm of weapons fire. They rolled and spun and twisted, somehow avoiding destruction despite being vastly outnumbered. Their ships moved like living things, reacting to threats with inhuman speed and precision. "War Master," Vorthak reported with growing alarm, "the humans are still approaching. Estimated time to contact is now 3 minutes. Kethver stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The human ships should have been destroyed within seconds of entering weapons range. Instead, they had somehow survived continuous fire from his entire fleet and were still closing the distance. "Impossible," he muttered. "No crew could survive those acceleration forces. No ship could maneuver like that." But even as he spoke, he began to understand what he was seeing. The humans were not just avoiding his weapons. They were using the Zephrian fleet's own size against them. The massive dreadnoughts could not risk firing directly at each other, so large areas of space became safe zones where the human ships could operate. And the humans seemed to know exactly where those safe zones were. "War Master," Vorthak called out urgently, "the lead human vessel is approaching within kinetic range." Kethver looked at the display and felt his first real moment of concern. The human flagship was less than 1,000 kilometers away and closing fast. At that distance, even primitive weapons might be able to cause damage. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," he ordered. "Do not let them get close." But it was too late. The Indomitable had reached point-blank range, and Admiral Chun was ready to show the galaxy what human weapons could really do. Admiral Sarah Chun felt the deck plates vibrate under her feet as the Indomitable's main kinetic cannon charged to full power. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the massive bulk of a Zephrian dreadnought filling her view. The enemy ship was so close that she could make out individual weapon ports and armor sections on its hull. "All weapons ready, Admiral," reported Tactical Officer Wang. "Targeting the shield generator cluster on the enemy vessel's port side." Chun nodded grimly. This was the moment that would determine whether humanity's desperate gamble would succeed or fail. Everything depended on the next few seconds. "Fire!" she commanded. The Indomitable's main cannon unleashed a tungsten penetrator rod moving at 30% of light speed. The projectile was only 2 meters long and 20 centimeters wide, but it carried the kinetic energy of a small nuclear weapon. Unlike energy-based attacks, which could be absorbed or deflected by shields, the solid metal rod punched through the Zephrian barrier like it was made of paper. The tungsten penetrator struck the dreadnought's hull with devastating effect. The impact created a hole 3 meters wide that went completely through the ship from one side to the other. Emergency alarms began wailing across the enemy vessel as atmosphere rushed out into space and internal systems failed, but Chen was not finished. Secondary batteries, continuous fire. Target their weapon systems. The Indomitable carried 12 smaller kinetic cannons along its flanks. These weapons fired rapid streams of smaller projectiles, each one designed to disable specific systems rather than destroy the entire ship. Tungsten slugs hammered into plasma cannon turrets, sensor arrays, and shield generators with surgical precision. Within 30 seconds, the mighty Zephrian dreadnought had been reduced to a helpless hulk. Its weapons were destroyed, its shields were down, and its propulsion systems were offline. The ship that had been capable of destroying entire planets was now drifting powerless through space, across the battle zone. The other human vessels were conducting similar attacks. The destroyer Relentless had closed with a Zephrian cruiser, and was systematically destroying its weapons with pinpoint kinetic strikes. The assault carrier Normandy had gotten close enough to an enemy battleship to deploy its secret weapon. "Marine boarding pods away," reported Captain Santos over the communication channel. 60 Marines inbound to enemy vessel. Chun smiled with fierce satisfaction. This was the part of the plan that would truly shock the Zephrians. Every other species in the galaxy fought wars with ships and weapons and computers. Only humans still believed in the value of personal combat. The boarding pods were simple devices, barely more than armored shells with life support systems and maneuvering thrusters. Each one carried 5 human Marines equipped with powered armor and enough weapons to fight their way through an entire enemy ship, but the real weapon was not their equipment. It was the Marines themselves. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez felt the familiar jolt as her boarding pod impacted the hull of the Zephrian vessel. Around her, 4 other Marines checked their weapons and prepared for combat. They had trained for this moment for years, but none of them had ever fought aliens in actual battle. "Breaching charges ready," reported Corporal Jackson, the team's demolition specialist. Rodriguez nodded. "Blow it." The shaped charges detonated with a sharp crack, cutting a hole through the enemy ship's armor plating. Emergency systems immediately tried to seal the breach, but the Marines were already moving through the opening and into the ship's interior. The first thing Rodriguez noticed was the gravity. Zephrian ships operated at only 60% of Earth normal, which made every human movement faster and stronger than the aliens expected. The second thing she noticed was the size of the corridors. They were built for creatures much larger than humans, which meant the Marines could take cover behind structures that the enemy considered open space. "Contact front," called out Private Chun as a group of Zephrian soldiers appeared around a corner. The aliens were impressive-looking creatures, nearly 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor plating. They carried energy weapons that could burn through steel, and their clawed hands could tear metal apart. By any rational measure, they should have been superior fighters to the small humans, but the Zephrians had made a crucial mistake. They had never learned to fight opponents who were faster, smarter, and more adaptable than themselves. Rodriguez dove behind a support beam as plasma bolts sizzled through the air where she had been standing. The Zephrian weapons were powerful, but they were also slow to recharge and difficult to aim in close quarters. While the aliens struggled to target the fast-moving humans, the Marines returned fire with their kinetic rifles. Human weapons were designed for wars fought on a world where everything was trying to kill you. They were simple, reliable, and deadly effective. Tungsten bullets punched through Zephrian armor like it was made of cardboard, and the aliens had no defense against weapons that ignored energy shields completely. Within minutes, the first group of enemy soldiers was down. Rodriguez led her team deeper into the ship, following corridors that had been mapped by intelligence analysis of captured Zephrian vessels. "Objective is the main reactor control room," she told her Marines. "We shut down their power, and this ship becomes a floating piece of scrap metal." Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Blood of Conquest, War Master Kethver was experiencing something he had never felt before in 60 years of warfare. For the first time in his long military career, he was genuinely afraid. "Status report," he demanded, his voice no longer carrying its usual confidence. Sub-Commander Vorthak worked frantically at his console, trying to make sense of the tactical situation. "War Master, we have lost contact with 7 dreadnoughts. The human vessels have somehow disabled their shields and weapons systems." Kethver stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 7 of his most powerful ships had been reduced to helpless hulks in less than 10 minutes. The small human fleet, which should have been destroyed immediately, was tearing through his armada like a pack of predators. "How is this possible?" he roared. "Their weapons are primitive metal projectiles. Our shields should stop them easily." "The humans are fighting at point-blank range, War Master," Vorthak explained. "Their kinetic weapons are moving so fast that our energy barriers cannot absorb the impact." Kethver felt his world turning upside down. Energy shields had been the foundation of space warfare for centuries. Every military doctrine, every tactical manual, every strategic plan was based on the assumption that shields could protect ships from enemy fire. The humans had just proven that assumption wrong. "And there is something else, War Master," Vorthak continued with growing alarm. The humans have deployed boarding parties. They are fighting inside our ships. This was even more shocking than the kinetic weapons. Personal combat had been abandoned by civilized species thousands of years ago. Modern warfare was conducted at vast distances using advanced technology. The idea of soldiers actually fighting each other hand-to-hand was considered barbaric and primitive. But the reports coming in from across the fleet told a different story. Human marines were moving through Zephrian ships like unstoppable forces of destruction. They were faster than the aliens, stronger in the reduced gravity, and completely ruthless in their tactics. The humans on the Destroyer of Worlds have reached the reactor control room, reported one ship captain. They are demanding our surrender or they will overload our power systems. The boarding party on the Eternal Victory has taken control of our weapon systems, called another. They are using our own guns against us. Kethver listened to these reports with growing horror. His mighty fleet, which had conquered dozens of star systems, was being defeated by 12 primitive ships crewed by creatures from a death world. But the worst was yet to come. War Master, Vorthak said urgently, the human flagship is approaching our position. They appear to be targeting us directly. Through the main viewport, Kethver could see the Indomitable approaching at incredible speed. The small human vessel looked like a metal dart compared to his massive flagship, but he now knew that appearances could be deceiving. All weapons, target that ship, he ordered. Destroy it before it can get close. The blood of conquests. Plasma cannons fired continuously at the approaching human vessel. But Admiral Chun had learned from watching the previous engagements. She used the bulk of damaged Zephrian ships as cover, threading her way through the debris field like a fighter pilot rather than a capital ship commander. The Indomitable reached kinetic range and opened fire. Tungsten penetrators slammed into the flagship's shields with devastating effect. The energy barriers flickered and collapsed under the concentrated assault, leaving the massive dreadnought defenseless. Shields down, Vorthak reported with despair. Hull breaches on multiple decks. We are losing atmospheric pressure. Kethver felt the deck shudder under his feet as more kinetic rounds punched through his ship's armor. Emergency lights flashed across the bridge, and the sound of rushing air indicated that the hull had been compromised. But Admiral Chun was not trying to destroy the flagship. She had a different plan in mind. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Earth Fleet," came a voice over the communication system. "War Master Kethver, you have exactly 60 seconds to order. The complete surrender of your forces, or we will demonstrate what happens when you threaten innocent civilians." Kethver laughed bitterly. "You have a few primitive ships against my entire armada. What makes you think you can dictate terms to me?" Chun's response was immediate and terrifying. "Because we come from a world that spent millions of years trying to kill us, and we learned to fight back. Your people have been using technology to win battles for so long that you have forgotten what real warfare looks like." As if to emphasize her point, explosions began erupting across the Zephrian fleet. Human marines were systematically destroying enemy ships from the inside, turning the aliens' own weapons against them. "You have 30 seconds, Chun continued. "Surrender now, or we will show the galaxy why humans are called Deathworlders." Kethver looked around his bridge at his terrified crew. These were warriors who had never known defeat, soldiers who had conquered entire civilizations. But they were looking at him with fear in their eyes, waiting for orders that he did not know how to give. "War Master," Vorthak whispered, "perhaps we should consider their terms." For the first time in his life, Kethver felt the bitter taste of defeat. His mighty armada was being destroyed by 12 ships that any rational analysis would have dismissed as insignificant. His advanced weapons were useless against enemies who fought like wild animals. His superior technology meant nothing against opponents who had learned to turn weakness into strength. "Open a channel to all ships," he said quietly. "Channel open, War Master." Kethver took a deep breath and spoke the words he had never thought he would say. "All Zephrian forces, this is War Master Kethver. Cease fire. Power down all weapon systems. We surrender." The effect was immediate. Across the battle zone, Zephrian ships went dark as their crews followed orders. The massive fleet that had seemed unstoppable just hours before was now helpless and defeated. Admiral Chun's voice came over the communication system once more. "Wise choice, War Master. Your forces will withdraw immediately from all occupied systems and return all prisoners and enslaved populations to their homes. Any ship that attempts to resume hostilities will be destroyed without warning." "Understood," Kethfer replied, his voice heavy with defeat. As news of the surrender spread across the galaxy, civilizations that had cowered in fear began to celebrate. The Zephrian Empire, which had threatened to conquer the known universe, had been stopped by 12 ships from a primitive world. But perhaps most importantly, the galaxy had learned a new lesson about warfare. Technology and superior numbers were not enough to guarantee victory. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies were those who had been forged by hardship and taught to never give up. The Galactic Council would later establish the Deathworld Doctrine, a military theory based on the simple principle that any species capable of surviving on a hostile planet should never be underestimated in combat. And throughout the galaxy, when parents wanted to teach their children about courage and determination, they would tell them the story of how 12 human ships changed the course of galactic history. The Deathworlders had answered the call for help, and the universe would never be the same.